If we were flying over the basilica, this is what it would look like from the air. I took this picture from a postcard, but the basilica, as you can see, is in the middle. You can see all the various areas of it with the 3 domes, 4, 5 domes that it has. And then you can also see the turrets or the towers that spire up, almost Arabian looking in some ways. And then next to the basilica is the friary, which would be the kind of T-shaped building that goes from the side of the basilica. That's where the friars live. Here, as we're looking up to the top of the basilica, we can see a gold statue of an angel, which is the angel Gabriel, who protects the basilica. It's a magnificent gold statue. We're now in the great, as we call it, the great Piazza di San Antonio, which is the piazza in front of the great Basilica of St. Anthony. It's a magnificent building, as you can see, with the columns on the second floor up there, the statue in the front. And then on the side to the right, we see a small chapel, which is also filled with a variety of images of St. Anthony. So as we walk through the piazza, then, we will come into the basilica and see the first thing on the side is the tomb of St. Anthony, which we will see right now. As we walk into the Basilica di San Antonio, we turn to our left, and there we see the tomb of St. Anthony. It's simple, but a beautiful rendition of a tomb for him. And as you can see, you can go up the stairs to what is an altar on the tomb, or you can go around to the back of the tomb and pray by touching the tomb itself. As we walk into the beautiful Basilica of St. Anthony, we are astounded, I was certainly, by the beauty of this church. And there in front of us is the high altar of St. Anthony's Basilica in Padua. It's magnificent and just is overwhelming in its beauty, in its color and the strength, which portrays devotion to this great St. Anthony. As you come closer to the altar and see the altar piece where the candles are, you can see the crucified Jesus, and then underneath him, the Blessed Mother as Queen, with St. Francis and St. Anthony on each side. As we're moving through the basilica, we come to the room of the relics, or the Reliquarium. And here you have a variety of relics of St. Anthony of Padua. In the center, that relic between the 2 figures there is a relic of St. Anthony's jaw, and with that is a relic of his tongue. When they exhumed his body, they found that the only part of him that was as if it had just been buried that day was his tongue. It was moist and still as if he was alive. And that was attuned to the fact that he was such a phenomenal preacher, and he preached, and that his tongue was a symbol of this preaching. The jawbone is also a symbol of that, that his mouth proclaimed the word of God. But this whole room is filled with a variety of relics of St. Anthony in it. Here in the reliquary room, we can see the Tonaca di San Antonio, which is the tunic of St. Anthony from 1231. So this is actually a part left from his actual habit that St. Anthony wore. Here again in the reliquary room is the actual casket, the original casket that St. Anthony was buried in. As you can see, that it's all wood, and then rolled up on the side there are the burial cloths that he was buried in. This casket was the original, and then when he was exhumed, his body was removed from there by St. Bonaventure, and then brought over to the tomb that we just saw recently. But this is the original tomb, the original casket of St. Anthony that you can see in the room of relics. This magnificent statue is outside behind the Basilica of San Antonio in Padua. And the idea of this is it's St. Anthony reaching up to the heavens and down to the earth, and Jesus is connecting the earth with himself through St. Anthony. It's a beautiful statue, and one that thousands of people see almost every day as they walk through the garden of the Basilica. I was very impressed with it. I think it's one of the most beautiful images of St. Anthony that we have. We've now moved from the garden into the Museum of St. Anthony, which is right behind the Basilica. And it's an amazing place where in this museum are a variety of images of St. Anthony, as you can imagine. But there's a beautiful section that has, as you can see, these tiny metals. They're like tin, some of them are bronze, some of them are gold even, but they're crafted or made because St. Anthony granted a favor to somebody, and in Thanksgiving, this was the gift they gave back to St. Anthony. So what you can see here now is a statue of St. Anthony, again with the lily, the baby in the book, and all around him are these medals that people crafted because they had received a favor or their prayers were granted by St. Anthony. This is a picture of the walnut tree, and in this you see there's like a little platform that the friars built for St. Anthony so he could sit up there and preach to all the people that would come to him. It's from this town in Campo San Piero that he really got sick, and they knew he was dying, and so after he came down from there, it was lunch with the friars where he really got sick, and that's where they started moving him toward Padua. Unfortunately, he didn't die in Padua. He died in the city of Argello. This little painting is also in the museum, as you can see, and this is from a child who fell from a balcony and did not die, survived the fall, and that's attributed to the prayers of St. Anthony. So again, you can see the actual incident on the side here, on the right-hand side of the painting, the child falling from the balcony, but then you see St. Anthony at the top there, providing protection, safety, and curing any injury that the child had. So after this incident happened and the child survived, someone in the family would create this painting in Thanksgiving to St. Anthony. This painting, again in the museum, is a painting of St. Anthony protecting those who are traveling. You can see the train below, and then St. Anthony over the train, kind of protecting it from any catastrophe or any ill fate. So St. Anthony is also, in many ways, a protector of those who travel. This is an actual painting that was done by someone in Thanksgiving to St. Anthony for being cured of an illness. As you can see, the man in the bed is holding his arms up, thanking God for the cure of whatever illness he had. A friend of his is sitting next to him in the bed. And then you can see in the top of the painting, St. Anthony and the Blessed Mother with the baby Jesus, insinuating that, of course, that this is St. Anthony praying to Mary and Jesus that this man would be cured, and obviously his prayer was granted. And these are the kinds of paintings that were done in the museum now that show how St. Anthony's great power worked through intercessory prayers. This unique statue of St. Anthony is symbolic of St. Anthony's bread for the poor. As we know, St. Anthony was deeply devoted to the poor, and this statue shows him handing bread to a child who was part of a family of the poor. So the woman, the child, and the man all symbolize the poor that St. Anthony so deeply loved. And as you can see, the child Jesus is there on the book, again, which symbolizes the Word made flesh. This is another image of St. Anthony, which I really like because it kind of ties in all of the miracles and kind of all of his life. So let's just take a second and go through some of this. Okay, so in the center, obviously, is St. Anthony of Padua. And then, as you look down to the left, you will see the fish. If you recall, where no one in the town would listen to him, so he went over to the river and started preaching, and the fish came up to listen to his homily. Over to the right-hand side, you see 3 donkeys. And those donkeys represent a story of St. Anthony where there was a guy who didn't believe in God. And he said to St. Anthony that he did not believe in God, nor especially the Eucharist. And so St. Anthony and he decided that they would do a test. And the test would be the gentleman would not feed a donkey for 4 days. And then St. Anthony would take the Eucharist and hold it up to see if the donkey went to eat it or the donkey would worship. And so when St. Anthony held the host up, the donkey knelt down on his knees in front of the consecrated host, showing the real presence of Christ and the fact that all creation worships the Lord Jesus Christ. Then you see, of course, the lilies, which show us, again, not only just purity, but also single-mindedness in the love of God. And then next to the lily is obviously a loaf of bread, which, as we spoke about before, is the actual idea of St. Anthony's bread for the poor, that he loved the poor so dearly and constantly gave as much to the poor as he possibly could, which calls us to do the same thing. Any of these symbols, of course, are symbols that call us, like St. Anthony, to become closer to God by the virtues that they celebrate. And then, of course, we have the candle, which shows us to be the light of the world, like Christ. And then, of course, the book of scriptures, the Gospels, where we are called to live the gospel, just like St. Anthony. Up in the top corner of the painting, you see a small, tiny chapel, which is the chapel in Campanario, which is where St. Anthony preached a great deal, up in the walnut tree where the friars had set up a platform for him. And he actually kind of lived up there and then preached to the thousands of people that would come to him. I really like this painting. It kind of ties the whole thing together. Not too far from Padua itself is the town of Arcella. And Arcella is the town where St. Anthony actually died. Here in their small chapel in the church there, they depict his passing. As you know, you saw the image of St. Anthony in the walnut tree. As I had mentioned before, when he came down from there, he was going to have lunch with the friars. And while he was having lunch, he began to get very sick and dizzy, etc. And so he told the friars that he was definitely dying. And so the friars put him in a cart to take him to Padua, where he suggested he wanted to die. And on the way to Padua is this town of Arcella, which is about maybe 40 minutes from Padua. And it was here that Anthony died, in the Poor Clare Monastery of the nuns who were there. And so St. Anthony didn't exactly get his wish to die in his beloved town of Padua, but he died not far from it. And then after his death, his body was brought to Padua for burial.